We are Makilala TV, the first Filipino-American TV talk show in the New York metro area. Get to know us as we talk to the community leaders, innovators, advocates, and emerging artists who affect Filipino-American life.
Every 10 years, every person living in the U.S., regardless of their citizenship or immigration status, is asked to participate in the census. However, in 2010, the final mail return rate for New York City was only 63%, while the national rate was 74.4%. More than $675 billion of federal funding is distributed to communities based on the number of people who actually fill out the census. But how does this affect us as FilAms in New York and across the US? And what can we do to ensure that appropriate resources are allocated to the schools, hospitals, and social services that we use every day? I, Rachelle Ocampo, am joined with my guest co-host, Laura Garcia, since Jen is at another event. So Laura is a current New York chairperson of NaFFAA, which is the National Federation of Filipino American Associations, on Makilala TV, to welcome our two special guest speakers who are leaders in getting the message out. Fill out the census or do not get counted. So first, we have Aries Dela Cruz, who is currently serving as a Manhattan Borough Lead for New York City Census. Prior to joining the mayor's office for the census, he was appointed by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to serve in his administration as his regional representative for Manhattan. He is most well known in the Filipino American community for helping to found the Filipino American Democratic Club of New York. Our next guest is Ryan Letada. He is the CEO and founder of NextDayBetter, a media platform that exists to rebrand migration. They tell untold stories of migrant communities and provide technology-enabled pathways for them to take collective action. Ryan is a Fulbright Fellow, Posse Foundation Scholar, and Google NextGen Policy Fellow. He serves on the Board of Trustees of Wheaton College, Massachusetts. So thank you both for joining us on Makilala TV, and of course, Laura, for gracing us with your presence and helping us fill in as our guest co-host. So Aries, let's get right to it. Why is it so important for us to answer and participate in the census? Do you have any examples of what happens to communities when they're undercounted?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be on the show and to join everyone again.
Yes.
I like to think of it as Filipinos love a party, right?
We do, yeah.
Think of the census as an RSVP to the most important party one could ever be invited to. And if you don't RSVP to that party, you could lose out on representation, on rights, and on your resources. So one example is if there's enough resources and only 100 people filled out the census, 100 kids, and the census can only the census then provides resources just for those 100 kids, but there's 150 people in a particular school, it means that those 50 kids have to then share those resources among themselves. So it's important to get as an accurate and count as possible for the Filipino American community.
No, I love that. I love that analogy because it really boils down to limited resources. If the government thinks that only 100 people are there, they're only going to give resources to 100 people because other communities are in need. So Ryan, with NextDayBetter, how does the census play into your media platform?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me here. And it's, for many Filipinos in the United States, they don't feel like they're even invited to the party.
Ooh,
so my role as part of NextDayBetter, a media company, is to convince every single Filipino, whether you are documented or undocumented, to participate in the census because it will benefit our community overall. So what happens to the undocumented Filipina tita who migrated here in the 70s are now retiring age, they are historically undercounted
Yes.
and hard to reach when it comes to the census. What happens when you have a Filipino child that is under the age of 5? Historically, they are also undercounted. Our community has not been counted accurately since we've been here in continental United States. So we need to change that, and we need to convince our fellow Filipinos to really participate in the census count.
Yeah, I mean, I remember filling out the 2010 census. That was 10 years ago, right? Almost 10 years ago. And I remember talking with my family about like why we need to count not just us 5, but our titas and titos that live in our house, our cousins that live in our house. It's like, no, they're not citizens. They don't count. It's like, no, every single person in this house has to be counted. Like, we have to. There's no trouble. There's not going to be in any trouble. Even though they have green cards, they're documented, there's still that sense of like not belonging here.
That is so true. And I also filled out the 2010 census, and I looked at the 2020 census questions, and they're pretty simple. However, my question is, how do we count for those who are living in the streets, or I'm in the healthcare professions? How do we count those who are in nursing homes or in the hospitals? How do we make sure that we count them accurately?
What the public should know is that in March, there will be what's called a group quarter count. And institutions, state institutions, healthcare institutions, clinics, residential facilities, dormitories,
And homeless shelters?
and homeless shelters, those will be counted by the administrators of those institutions. So that's how we make sure that those places will have a full and accurate count.
I would like to say, though, that we can't wait till March. Like,
Yeah.
we need to take action now, because the fact of the matter is, the awareness level of census and what is census is very low in the Filipino community. So whenever we are angry or frustrated that we're not getting enough funding or resources, it's because there is no accurate data about Filipinos in the United States, and therefore we do not get the funding, right? And so that's incredibly important. For us, we're doing this campaign called Why We Count. And it is for the very first time in U.S. history, the census is going digital.
Yes, we forgot to mention that point. This is the first time
That's
it's going to be online.
Yeah, so if you are on Facebook, you should be able to complete the census. Not on Facebook itself, but just access to the internet.
Yeah.
And so again, how do we get people, Filipinos, to say, like, I matter, I count, but also at the same time empower community organizations like NaFFAA to actually go in the streets, find the Filipinos in nursing homes or senior homes, and get them to participate. We need to empower our community organizations to get involved.
That is great that we are going digital. And next year, I think, is the beginning of the technology, or applying or filling out the census digitally. So is there a problem? How safe, or how will there be no breach of filling out this questions? And this is the beginning, and this is the first that we're going to do this. Are there any fears?
One of the most important messages that I can carry forth as part of New York City Census 2020 is that the census is easy. It's easy to fill out. It's 10 questions. It is safe to fill out. It's protected under federal law, under Title 13, which means that if anyone violates the confidentiality of the census, there'll be prison time and a fine.
Wow.
So it's safe. And also that it's important. Filipino Americans and Filipinos in the United States have contributed so much to this country, even before this country was founded. So we want to be an important part of the civic society and civic participation, and the census is one of the most important ways in which they can do that. I think it's like the statistic is 2036, 10% of the electorate will be Asian American, and included in that electorate will be Filipino Americans. But we can be registered to vote, we can be part of that electorate, but all that will mean nothing if we don't fill out the census now. we can vote so many times, but there's only so much that the federal government can do if we don't show up and make ourselves visible by signing up for the census.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows how important this census is, because it's going to determine the next 10 years of our lives.
That's right.
Yeah.
Of where resources are going to be.
And another thing that we like to say is it's 10 questions that you can do in 10 minutes that will affect the next 10 years of your life. All that federal funding, $75 billion in federal funding. If you have a child now, and if you don't, the responses that you put on the census for you and your child determines the resources they will receive all the way up until high school. And I know that education funding is something that's so important to Filipino Americans and their families.
Yes.
And Aris, I think the challenge also is, and you were alluding to this, is that a recent Census Bureau surveys had indicated that over 50% of individuals within the United States don't actually trust the census. And so we really need to convince our Filipino communities and immigrant communities in general to say that this is, our future is at stake here. You might be takot or scared to get involved, but this is again for our future. Future over fear.
Ooh,
and that's what
I
we
like
have
that.
to really think about.
No, I like that you brought that up, that concept up, because there's the citizenship question that has been brought up within our community. Why is the citizenship question giving such a so-called chilling effect or fear factor in relation to the census? What's the big deal of asking it?
One important message that I can share is that the Supreme Court determined this summer that it was unconstitutional to place that question in the census, so it's no longer something that we need to worry about. And even if the citizenship question did end up on the census, it is still protected and under federal law, and it cannot be shared with any other federal institution other than for the purposes of statistics.
Okay, Aries, has citizenship been a standard question in the census?
Not that I know of, at least not for the decennial census. I only know what's happening for next year, which is that it's not going to be there, and so it's not something that we need to worry about.
I do have a follow-up question to that. And how do you think politics affected the attempt to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census?
Sure. So, politics is always about resources and representation. And one of the reasons that the city played part in a lawsuit against the federal government was we thought that the citizenship question was an attempt to change the way things were represented and to favor certain states over others. And so that was the role that politics played. But we can continue to play an important role politically by saying that representation does continue to be important, regardless of whether the citizenship question is there or not. Again, because the census will determine congressional representation as well as representation in the Electoral College. So it's very important, if you care about politics, to show up for the census.
But that is the thing. I don't think many people do care about politics. They care about how is this going to affect my family and myself. And I love that you brought that analogy up, because it really just shows if you are not counted, there's going to be even less resources for you and your community. That's the bottom line.
Right.
That's the bottom line.
And I think it's the citizenship question, or the politics, have actually delayed the whole mobilization of community organizations to get to educate our community about why the census matters. And you're 100% right. Community over politics, right? Community in the sense that I count because my child, it goes to the school district and they deserve better budget and better schooling.
Yes.
I count because my seniors that are in my community deserve a home and a budget to ensure that they are alive and well and live life with dignity. And so it has to be personal to us, and it has to be relevant to what it means to be Filipino and American. And we need to shout that, because census is related to that.
Yeah.
So putting citizenship aside, and what do you think are other barriers, or what prevents people from participating in the census, and what can we do to solve this problem or this issue?
Well, we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, particularly in New York City. It's a city of 200 languages, over 300 square miles. And I think our response rate was somewhere in the
Aries.
somewhere in the low 60s. And of course, the citizenship, the possibility of a citizenship question, that is a bell that cannot be unrung, unfortunately, and it's something that we have to work through. Fortunately, under the leadership of Mayor de Blasio, they created the New York City Census 2020 office. And one of the things that we'll be doing is we're creating what's called neighborhood organizing committees, where you can sign up in your neighborhood to be a volunteer and to get the word out by hosting teach-ins and doing phone banks. One of the ways that people can sign up for that right now is they can go to nyc.gov/census and they can sign up to volunteer.
Yeah, that was actually my follow-up question when you mentioned, like, we should be starting now, not waiting till March. So how can we get involved? So that's one of the ways, is going to that website. What was it again? It was
nyc.gov/census.
Okay, got it.
Right. But technology also here is both a positive and a negative. Negative because there is a massive misinformation campaign about the census that are making our communities confused as to what the census is about. So we really need to provide relevant, culturally accessible information about the census that actually relate to Filipinos. So the more community organization can say, this census relates to the tita or tito, then that is going to be important that we push that out there. So just wanted to say that that is really important.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the Filipino community can have a lot of divisions along political and generational and even class lines. But what's great about the census, it really is something that all of us, no matter how we classify ourselves and the kind of groups that we are with in the Filipino community, left or right, rich or poor, the census is something that we can all unite towards and something that we can be proud of accomplishing and saying that we count and that we are visible and that, yes, we are important. We can have power. We can exercise that power. And we can be seen by the federal government. We can tell the federal government that, yes, we're an important and engaged force in our state and in our country.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes no amount of encouraging people to answer or participate in the 2020 census, there will still be people who would say, no, I opt not to participate. So what are the consequences of people not participating in the 2020?
Or not answering completely.
Right.
Yeah. Those things in your community, things like potholes and not having enough hospital beds, not having enough desks for kids, things like food stamps and senior centers. So much federal money involves senior centers and child care, Head Start, those things. Anything that you care about as a Filipino American or as an American in general, as someone who lives in this country, the census touches all that. The census is one of the most important civil rights and social justice initiatives in our community, and it's really up to all of us to make sure that any hesitation, you can just ask someone, well, what is it that you care about the most? What is it that's most important to you? What are you most looking forward to? That all is touched by your involvement in the census.
And I do want to reiterate, if there is anyone that has any questions about the census or needs help filling it out, like reach out to whether it be Aries, Ryan, Makilala, NaFFAA. Really, the main thing is that we want to get counted. We want to help support each other, because if you're counted, we're all counted as a community. Yes, definitely.
That is so true. And we are actually, each one of us is a part in shaping our future. And just like you have to get out and vote, you have to also get up and fill out the census.
Yes. Yes. So tell us a little bit more about your work with Census 2020 and your team. How do you actually get there in the neighborhoods? Do you actually have like an outreach team, or do you rely on community organizations?
There's both. We will partner with community organizations in the census. We will be providing grant money so that those organizations can do outreach. But we also have our own outreach and field efforts. We are going to go to community board meetings. We're going to go to block associations, holiday, everything. Your houses of worship and just local community groups. We're going to be going to them. We're going to be recruiting for these neighborhood organizing committees and organizing people at the most grassroots level. because they know most
Yes,
who
agreed.
in their communities are, and the kind of messaging and the messages that are most relevant to the people in their communities who are the most hesitant to answer the census.
Okay, and unfortunately, we do have to begin closing this episode. I told you it's going to happen so quick, and I'd like to ask Aries and Ryan one last question. What is one message that you'd like to make sure that people remember about your work?
When you receive that census postcard in the mail, it is 10 questions, it will take 10 minutes, and it will affect the next 10 years of your life.
Love that. Okay.
Perfect. Yes, that's perfect. And on our end, we are providing free stories and marketing tools for community organizations to go out there and actually convince Filipinos to actually participate in the census. So whether you're NaFFAA, UniPro, or whoever else, this will be made available to you in our collaboration with the New Venture Fund, a foundation that is helping get immigrant communities counted.
I love that. And so how can we get more information? What was the website again?
nyc.gov/census.
And then next
whywecount.org.
whywecount.org. All right. So thank you again, Aries and Ryan. Now you can learn more about the census with a special member message from our partners. Again, nyc.gov/census and whywecount.org. All right. Thank you again, and see you next time.
Makilala in Minutes, featuring New York City Mayor de Blasio. Why is the census important?
We have a special obligation to reassure people, to tell them how important it is to be involved, and that they will be made stronger by standing up to this fear. Because literally, by confronting the fear, there is more likelihood of Latino representation. By confronting the fear, there's more likelihood of money reaching the Latino community that it deserves. For seniors, for children, for people who need affordable housing. But it's also, I think, very important civically to not give in to the fear. This is a country that one day the single largest community will be the Latino community, and people should start right now the practice of owning the full process and not letting anyone tell them that they should be excluded.
What are knocks and how are they going to help get a complete count?
The new initiative is called Knocks, like knock on the door, but the acronym is NOCCS. It is Neighborhood Organizing Census Committees. And the idea is that the most trusted voice in anyone's life is the people in their immediate life, family and friends, people on their block, people they work with, people they worship with. We want to take all that energy, folks who want to help us get this right and are willing to put in their own time and energy to do it. And we are signing people up with cards as simple as this all over the city. We think thousands of people are going to get involved because we're hearing already from folks that they want to be a part of this and they want to help get it right. So there will be census organizers all over the city working on this, literally encouraging grassroots activism to make sure that people have that trust and they sign up.
So thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. So I really want to explain why we feel we need these neighborhood organizing committees. We have an unprecedented situation here in New York City. In 2010, New York City's self-response rate to the census was 61.9%. The national average was 76%. The borough of Brooklyn was at 55%. And that was in 2010. We've been dealt what can only best be described as a very bad hand here in New York City for two reasons. One, as the mayor talked about, the citizenship question. New York City, we were a plaintiff on the case, and it's wonderful that we won the case at the Supreme Court. But the problem is, due to the fact that the president continues to tweet about it and threaten executive order, the people that we need to reach most don't know that we won that case. And we have to then undo the misinformation that the Trump administration has spread. The second reason that we're in an unprecedented situation is because the census for the first time is online. That's wonderful. It means that people will literally be able to take out their phone during the self-response period starting in mid-March and in several minutes fill the census out. but it presents unique challenges to a city like New York, where a third of New Yorkers do not have access to broadband. So that is why we're in an unprecedented situation, and that is why we need to organize, and that is really why this announcement today is so incredibly important. I chaired a local community board, Manhattan Community Board 1, this very area, for 7 years, and so I really know firsthand that, as the mayor said, it's neighbor-to-neighbor contact that can make a difference, and that is why we're announcing the Knox. So before I take you to the interactive website, let me tell you what these neighborhood organizing committees will do. First of all, we've divided New York City into 245 Knox. These Knox will do 4 things. First, trainings. Our team will train these Knox volunteers in a civil rights style Census 101 trainings about what the census is, why it matters, the fact that we're fighting for our fair share of over $650 billion, funding for public education, public housing, Medicaid, etc. This is a train-the-trainer model that is proven to work. Secondly, census ambassadors. So volunteers will then take what they've learned and they will then become census ambassadors in their own neighborhoods. They will hold teach-ins. We're going to give them printed materials, talking points, digital toolkits, and more. Third, the Knox will engage in phone banks and text banks. So with support and supervision, of course, from our team, volunteers will host phone and text banks. And they'll use the latest campaign-style direct engagement technologies. Fourth and finally, the Knox will also sometimes be paired with local community organizations. As the mayor announced, we recently announced our $19 million grants program. So we will pair Knox, when appropriate, with local community organizations that are receiving grants.